Welcome, everybody. We're super excited to have you here. I'm trying not to scream into my mic. I'd like to welcome Pamela Duckerman. Woo! Hi, Pamela.
Hi, Alana.
I'm
Great
so
to be
excited you're
here.
here. Oh my gosh. And Pamela, for those of you who don't know, welcome, Pamela. Pamela is a renowned author. She is the brilliant and hilariously comedic writer and columnist behind Bringing Up Bebe, which is one of her earlier publications, but we're going to get into all of that right now. Pamela, thank you so much for being here with me today.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you. I get to virtually travel to Canada because I can't do it actually.
That's right. So you're coming to us live from Paris, France. Is that correct?
I am.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Pamela knows all about us over here at MomFest and our diehard Canadian fan base. We have lots of people tuning in. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Pamela and I are just going to have like a conversation for the next about an hour, and we'll leave the last 10 minutes open for Q&A. But if you have any questions for Pamela about anything we're discussing, just go ahead and throw it up in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer those questions when we can. So, Pamela, I'd love for us to just start telling us a little bit about you. How did Pamela, the author, come to be? Where are you from? How did you end up in France? Let's start with that.
So I grew up in Miami, which is, I know, like a winter outpost for Canadians.
Yes.
Many of your listeners will be familiar with it. I've met a lot of Canadians on Miami Beach. I found myself in New York. And then I was a journalist covering Latin America. I was living in Argentina and Brazil. And then like the worst thing that ever happened to me in my life happened, which is I got fired from my journalism job. They laid off 200 people in a day. And suddenly I was like, what am I going to do? And there was this guy I had met in Argentina, like at a bar in Argentina, who kind of liked. And he called me up. He's like, what are you doing? I said, well, nothing. I have no work. And he said, why don't you come? He's British, but he moved to Paris. And he said, why don't you come hang out in France for a while? So I thought, I have nothing else to do. I didn't speak French. For the first 2-3 months in Paris, I just spoke Spanish to everyone, which I thought that they would understand. Now I realize I should have just spoken English because everyone here speaks English now.
Hilarious.
And so I was sort of like a fish out of water, landing in this country that was indifferent to my presence. The French didn't care that I had arrived.
Right.
And I ended up staying and kind of having to figure it out.
That's so amazing. So, I mean, first of all, I would love to hear about this. Like, it sounds like an awesome sort of romance story that happened somewhere in an Argentinian bar that we won't dive into now, but
Cue up bad romance. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would love to hear about it because I know that you are also like relationship sex is also part of your narrative in writing recently, but that's awesome. So your author, tell me what is the biggest challenge you've encountered in your career so far? Actually, let's not do that question. I apologize.
Okay, no problem.
Let's go to your. I like these questions better. I'm just going to go here.
Okay.
So you write mostly about France. How did you get interested in the topic of France?
Okay, so it was definitely a sort of make lemonade situation because I'm in France. I have no job. Journalism is shrinking. There were no journalism jobs. There was a shrinking market, and I thought, what am I gonna write about? And I thought, well, I'm here, I'll just start writing about France. And so I did one book about, I had heard that France was sort of the capital of infidelity, and that, famously, like the French president had a mistress who came to his funeral with his illegitimate daughter. So first I did a book about infidelity, and I tried to sort of examine this myth, like, is it really like that? Turns out it's not at all. So I wrote this first book,
Yeah.
And then, as happens when one is in love, but not exclusively when one is in love, I fell pregnant from the same fellow I had met at a bar in Buenos Aires.
Love it.
The British man. And so I had a baby, and I certainly didn't think that there was anything special about French parenting. It wasn't one of the plenty of things people talk about France. They talk about the fashion, about the cheese, about the shoes, about the wine, but no one talked about French parenting. But I suddenly started to notice that it was very different from my, I would say, North American expectations about the way parenting goes. So I literally was on vacation with my daughter. We were at, stop me if I'm getting into too much detail, but no. we were at a restaurant. and it was my husband and I on vacation with my daughter. She was about 18 months old at the time. And it was just a nightmare. We were in a restaurant. She was like, I remember she was throwing like calamari everywhere. There was just like a ring of fried calamari around our table.
Right.
And then I kind of looked around at all these French families who were on vacation, who had kids around the same age, and they were having a completely civilized, normal experience. They were sort of having. So from then I thought, it made me think of all these other things that I had seen in France that were different. Like people asking me when my daughter was a month old, like, oh, does she do her nights yet? Like, does she sleep through the night yet?
Right.
And my thinking, are you crazy? Like, of course she doesn't. She's a month old. And they're kind of like surprised that it hasn't happened yet. And so I started to look around and then I looked at some of the scientific research that had been done comparing North American and French parenting. And I realized like, there's something going on here. And I want to investigate, partly out of like journalistic curiosity and partly out of like my own just desperation as a mother of a young child.
And I love that. And I think, we're getting tons of questions here and tons of girls are fangirling in the comments right now. It's really fangirling hard and saying how much you got them through everything, and other women saying how they themselves are. Jennifer just said that she herself is half French and half British, and she recognized so many things you said in her book.
Does she have like
recognized her own family?
Probably warring within her.
Exactly. It's so funny. I mean, I couldn't imagine being a young woman like yourself showing up in a country where you don't speak the language, having this baby, and having that aha moment being like, wait a minute, what am I doing here? Like, I didn't get the memo here. And then you deciding to write the memo. Like you wrote the manifesto of like, here's this insider thing that I'm noticing. So kudos to you because go ahead.
I was worried about it because I thought if it was really this important, surely someone else would have noticed it before me. Like why? And I knew I was part of this kind of mommy group of Anglophone mothers in Paris. And we would get together once a week and they would just complain all the time about French mothers, how French parenting had a kind of like in our circles, a sort of negative reputation, in part because the French women didn't breastfeed at all. And they seemed to go back to work right away. So it was a real leap for me to say, you know what, this is real. But the more I did research and the more confident I became that like I'm seeing something and I also thought like, well, what if I had ended up in Iceland? Would I be writing a book about Icelandic parenting? Is this just random? But it turns out when you look at the research that France really is exceptional in some ways.
Exceptional. And I think it resonated so deeply with me because my honeymoon 6 years ago was in Paris, and noticing women drinking and beautiful and kids everywhere and the smoking the cigarettes and of course the food and the fashion and all those things. But reading your book my kid was 4 months old when I got my hands on your book. And I wish if anyone is on this, and I'm seeing somebody just right now, Meredith just wrote, I'm on chapter 9 and loving it. That this is, another woman just wrote, it was what I read. And then I handed it, Miranda just read, I just passed it through all my mommy friends afterwards and they've loved it too. So I think you did a great job, I think, sort of saying like, there's not one way of parenting, and I think that itself resonates deeply with people. And I mean, I couldn't imagine, and this is what I was trying to get at before, like, did you feel any sense of isolation or loneliness in those early stages of parenthood? Was part of this a response to maybe feeling uniquely alone or loneliness just because of the Anglophoneness of your existence in a very French-speaking world, I guess is my question.
Yeah, I felt kind of isolated among my group of like, my small group of Anglophone mom friends who had some very, I would say, North American ideas about what you were supposed to do. They were very, they didn't, France has this, I think Canada might have something similar, like this system of creches, public creches, or it's like daycare where we can put your kid in daycare from the time he's or she's a few months old if you want to, until they're about age 3. And none of the Anglophone moms I knew were willing to do that because they thought of daycare as we had in America as something like dangerous and harmful, and you shouldn't go back to work. And that question was sort of answered for them. Whereas all the French moms I knew had 3 months of maternity leave, and then more or less were like by 6 months or a year were definitely back at work and thought this was important for their kid and important to get their life back. So I felt a little bit like, caught between cultures.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
Right. And also but at the same time, parenting has changed a lot in North America in the past like 25 years. This like what we call hyper parenting is like a fairly new phenomenon. So I felt that I was expected to parent in a way that I myself had not been raised, that I was supposed to do more, be more involved, sacrifice more, feel more guilty, do more sort of pushing of early development. And I felt like there was a critique of that out there, that people knew it didn't quite make sense and no one knew quite what we were doing at all. But I guess there was a sense of like everyone else is doing it, so we have to do it too. So France seemed to offer, in some ways, like an alternative to that, or a different way of thinking about things.
No, that's right. And that's what my next question is. You say do Americans like being compared to the French?
It's funny because when my book first came out, it got really like attacked by American moms who said, I don't want to hear about the French, and the French have a reputation for being slightly, let's say, full of themselves.
Right.
And there's this long love-hate relationship between America and France, which has to do with, which goes back like hundreds of years at this point. But I've found that people quickly got over that because parents were so eager, and in some cases, like myself, we were kind of like desperate to find an alternative to what we were doing, because it clearly was not having the outcome that we wanted. I mean, you look at the studies showing that like parents are less happy than non-parents, that they become more unhappy with each successive child. Like there's something that it has a negative impact on the parents' relationship. So clearly, like something was broken. And so I found that over the years that the book has been out, that people have become more and more, Americans in particular, have become just more and more open to looking at the way people elsewhere in the world do things. I mean, we can be a tiny bit insular, you might have noticed.
Right.
And just in all areas, not just in parenting, there's more and more interest in like how the Canadians do healthcare and how the Australians manage their gun laws. And there's a sense on a lot of levels that we're not like the sort of last word in every area.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because you yourself, I guess, become a subject matter expert through your journalism. So here you are taking a journalistic approach to looking at this sort of cultural difference that you're noticing, and then therefore write this book that has obviously been like a Bible for many parents about sort of an outsider's perspective of doing things when parenting often feels very dogmatic. And here you are saying like, well, there's other ways of doing it. So taking the same approach, let's talk about how French approach the question of work-life balance. I'd love for you to talk about that.
I mean, the assumption very much is that it's important for women to have jobs of their own and careers. There are women who stop working when they have kids, but I don't know many of them. There isn't a big debate about whether it's a good idea to go back to work. And French women would tell me, like, the reason I'm going back to work is for my kids, so that they will see me working and they'll see I have a life outside of them.
Right.
And they would say it's actually not good for a child to think that the parent's whole life and happiness hinges on the child. And also that, as much as it's in consuming and beautiful, raising kids lasts, 20 years approximately. I'm thinking in French, à peu près. So, what do you do after that?
Right.
And I think the French are very structurally conscious of this issue and how hard it is to go back to work when you've been out of the workforce.
Yeah. And I think that's super relevant for Canadian moms. I think that part of the identity shift when you become a new mom is this sort of balance between what was and what is. So when we drill down a bit here, I know you've written a children's book called Paris by Phone that will be published in February of 2021.
That's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that book?
It's actually based on, sort of inspired by, I should say, Bringing Up Bébé. It's a rhyming picture book. I worked with a French illustrator. His name is Benjamin Shaw. He's amazing and hilarious and sort of brought my words to life. And it's my first time doing a children's book. It was really, really fun. I love rhyme, and I always have. So this is a great opportunity.
That's amazing. And we're reading from my Paris mug, by the way, that I bought on my honeymoon from Starbucks in Paris.
Lovely.
But there you go. People are asking some questions here. Maybe I'll go to some questions here. Cassandra asked, does the book just cover the first year, or is it about kids in general?
I would say it covers sort of, I mean, there are lessons that can apply all around.
Yeah.
I would say I cover a lot on the early years, like in terms of sleep and feeding, and discipline and behavior. But there are parts of it that would be relevant to a 10-year-old too. I mean, I still sort of try to implement some of the principles of the book with my kids who are now a lot older.
And tell me about, yeah, so I'm going to go back to our questions here. You're just getting fan mail. Like everyone's just saying how much you've helped them through. We have some French expats who are from Paris or from France who are living in Canada, as we are a Francophone country, and saying how your book actually helped them understand the expectations of North American culture compared to French culture.
Because I think that French, Canadian Francophone parenting is much more like North American parenting than it is like French parenting.
That is, but we have some women who've moved to Canada from France saying that it helped them understand that.
Yeah. So they would still, even though they speak the language, would need a sort of cultural interpreter.
Yeah, it seems like that's the case. And I think for me, like, I as you and I are talking, I refresh my memory here that some of the parenting decisions I made about my own kid going to daycare and stuff like that and returning to work and the launch of my own career here with this company was a direct result from your book. So it's so, it's aha moments when I realized that like so much of Mom's TO and what we created in this community really draws a direct line from what I read from you. So this is why it makes sense for you to be our keynote fireside launcher. No pressure, but it is, I mean, you really did something major, obviously, which you know about. So let's talk about turning 40. So after bringing up a bit, you wrote There Are No Grown-Ups about turning 40. What made you want to write that book? And what are some of the key things you discovered? Because I can't wait to be 40. I'm 3 years away and I'm like dying to be 40. So I'm super curious to know about
why are you looking forward to turning 40?
You know, I feel like it's going to be my best year ever and my shit's going to be together. And like, I can sort of, and maybe this is one of the things that you talk about. I'm not exactly sure, but like, I find like I'm just going to chill out a bit. Like I find like my 30s is me building my family and establishing my career and carving out my marriage. And now I feel like in my 40s, I can just sort of maybe enjoy it a little bit as opposed to like hustling. I can sort of go from the grind to being a little bit more smooth. That's what I think is going to happen in my arbitrary making up of things that are going to happen in 3 years. But I'd love to hear what happens in the book.
Well, I'm always encouraged when I see women who are excited about aging because there's, you know, like we're taught to dread getting older.
Of course.
And which I think I was much more in that model when I was even working on this book. But I wanted to find out what the 40s were really about. It turns out I'm sorry to say this, but they're just incredibly busy because you have, you know, if you have kids and you also have parents who are getting older who are like less helpful maybe with those children. Yeah. And it's certainly also like there are some existential moments of exactly what you just described. Like you're passing through all these milestones when you're younger. You can keep sort of checking boxes. And then you turn 40 and like nobody's kind of cheering you on anymore. It's not clear exactly what you're supposed to do. You're probably more established in your career, so that kind of goes, but suddenly you're the one who's supposed to be encouraging other, you know, it was all about like getting your parents' approval or getting social approval. And suddenly like you're the person who's mentoring, who's giving approval, who's telling other people what to do. And it's kind of disorienting because it's not like you suddenly feel like this great authority on anything. You've just been sort of winging it for a little bit longer than everyone else.
Oh, sorry. My son just woke up. My 12-week-old. My husband's going to go get him. Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm not scared of aging. Maybe that's just I think my mom aged really gracefully, you know, so maybe that's part of it. And they are like a very young, late 70s, you know, so maybe that's why I'm less fearful. And I think maybe because my siblings are 10 and 12 years older than me and I'm seeing them in their 40s and thriving and being fabulous. So maybe that's why.
I think that's so important to have role models. And I did a lot of like scientific research on the 40s when I was working on this book. And what I basically figured out and was like, is that there's no point in life where you're great at everything. Like peaks and valleys at every age. Like, so there's some things that like when you're in your 20s, you're really good at like memorizing information and your brain works really quickly. And, but you're less good at sort of synthesizing information and seeing patterns and understanding other people. So in your 40s, you're really good at those things.
I love that. I can't wait to synthesize patterns. It's not my expertise. Anyone who knows me.
I don't believe that a lot. I bet you synthesize really well.
Somebody just said, Meredith Irwin just said, definitely get it. My son is 3 months old and I've been sleeping. Oh, this is a comment about bringing up Bebe, that she felt lucky to have the advice from your book and she loved the idea of la pause.
Oh.
The wait is golden. Can you discuss that for a minute, actually, while I just nurse my kid? Is that okay? I'm going to go on mute for a second.
Sure.
I don't hear the baby crying.
No problem. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was like fundamental in understanding French parenting was this idea that a child, even a little baby, is a person already who's capable of learning things, and that you're, as a parent, one of your jobs, oh, can we see your baby? So cute. Is your job to teach them. And one of the things you can teach them from very early on is how to sleep well. So they call it sort of sleep teaching. And they say that if your baby cries and you rush in instantly every time, your baby's not going to learn how to connect to sleep cycles and go back to sleep on his own. So it's really important to they don't call it the pause. I called it the pause. They didn't have a name for it. They just assume that's what you should do, is to just wait a few seconds, or when the baby gets a little more skilled at this, a few minutes, and let the baby try to learn how to sleep, go back to sleep on his own or her own.
I would say that the concept of la pause, that golden moment of waiting, puts you in parenting expert category by itself. Sorry, my son is so fuzzy right now. Oh man.
It's really weird as a journalist to be considered like a parenting expert, because I assume that that's for sort of like pediatricians and people with PhDs. I have a master's in international relations.
Just sorry about that. Okay,
sorry,
Zoe.
I'd sing.
That's okay. So Zoe just said a few seconds ago, now that your kids are older, do you think you will come up with a direct follow-up to bringing up Bebe?
That's a really good question. I have done a couple articles, like I do a column for the New York Times, and I've written about things like sex ed in Europe, which gets a little bit maybe more closer to issues that would affect adolescents, which was just the age of my kids. But it was much easier to write about my kids when they couldn't read. Now it's a little tricky. I don't think that it would be as keen.
Yeah, I think about that. I think about the content I've created and like, will my kids be okay when they see the stuff that I've put out into the world? That's something to even think about, right? I haven't given it that much thought, to be honest. If you follow me, my content is pretty edgy.
How old is your oldest kid?
4. I have some time.
Yeah. Well, maybe just don't teach them to read.
You know what? I'm definitely not going to teach them how to read. That's a great idea. Pamela, let's talk a little bit about more sex ed in the education in the US versus Europe. How do Europeans teach kids about sexuality? I would never even think to ask that question, but I guess that's something you're experiencing now. So why don't you go deep on that? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Go deep on that. No pun intended. Well, I mean, in America, I don't know if it's like this in Canada, but you eventually have like the talk with your kid where you sit them down one day and it's really awkward, and you kind of explain how babies are made, and then the kid says, "Mom, I knew that already, and can I go, please? Like, can this be over?
You're embarrassing me." Yeah.
Right. Uh-huh. And in I look pretty closely at Holland, because they're the sort of world leaders in sex ed, and they don't have the talk when the kid is 15.
Holland?
The Netherlands. Yeah.
Oh, the Netherlands is the leader in sex education?
The world leaders in sex ed. Yeah.
Okay.
They start doing very basic like sexuality education when kids are really little. Like, I think it's kindergarten or first grade. It's part of all the way through. It's part of the curriculum, the national curriculum.
Oh,
it's
smart.
very basic at the beginning. But their idea, which I thought was really cool, is that if a kid is old enough to ask a question, then he or she deserves an answer. And it's an age-appropriate answer. It's like, it will be something like, how is a baby made? Mommy and daddy, mommy has an egg and daddy has a sperm, and those come together and make a baby. And most kids will not ask anything else. They will not say how to, ask for any details. But if the kid is, kind of curious enough to ask another question, then you give another answer. And it doesn't have to be graphic, but it's not a big mystery. It's not a charged secret topic. It's just a normal part of life that's described that way. And you see with teenagers in the Netherlands, it's quite common if the teenagers are in a serious, loving relationship that the parents will let the boyfriend sleep over at the girlfriend's house, for example. Wow. It's not an issue. So the idea is that Americans kind of assume sex is, or try to pretend like sex is not happening, even though the age of first intercourse is 17 in both countries. Like Americans try to pretend it's not happening. The average age, of course, is Americans try to pretend it's not happening. So teenagers will have sex in secret, and it's more likely to be unsafe sex. Whereas in the Netherlands, and also like in France, the birth control pill, you don't need permission from your parents. I'm pretty sure it's free. The day after pill, you can walk into any pharmacy, even as a teenage girl, and get a day after pill. It's really matter of fact, I would say. Right. So in France, I don't really have, the sex ed in school is not great. My daughter told me it was like one of the most awkward experiences of her life. But what they do, they have lots of books, and it's very common for parents to just give the kid a book and say, here, read this. Oh my God, but they also will allow sleepovers and things like that.
Oh my God, that's so interesting. And what I love, Pamela, about somebody like you as a mom, as an author, as a researcher, a journalist, is like these golden nuggets. Okay, let's talk about turning 40. Let's talk about talking about sex ed with our kids. Like, I can't wait to talk to my 4-year-old when he's 13 about this stuff. But maybe there's some golden nuggets there that you're learning about sex education that maybe this is the time to start having those conversations, right? So
well, you might get questions. So if they have questions, I love the idea of giving an answer.
Giving them answers. And I love that idea. I love talking to women who are at a slightly different vintage of parenting than me, just because there's so much insight there, right? So like, I'm still like, sorry, my son is farting. I'm not sure if you can hear that.
I assumed it was the chair.
No, just the baby's bum. It's amazing to me to like have these golden nuggets of information because, Pamela, obviously you're an author, you're world renowned, but when you pen these things, right, it becomes, I don't know, I don't want to say law, but like it becomes so important, I think. So I can't wait to see what you're going to publish on this topic, because I think it's going to be big aha moments for parents across the world, because obviously if a teenager understands and has a different relationship about sexuality, and about young women having different relationships to their bodies, and how, let's say, the sexualization of their experience, and as parents trying to be cool about it, it doesn't mean ignoring it. It means hitting it straight on. I think that's a huge lesson that I can't wait to try to employ in my own parenting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to normalize it maybe too much. Like my daughter is just like, I don't want to have any more plain spoken conversations about this.
Like, Mom, stop.
Yeah, it's awkward. It's supposed to be awkward for a reason.
That's so funny. I love that. No, I think that you are a master of many here, starting with so many ages and stages that are so relevant. And that's why I think like, I love having you on this stage with me today, and I'm going to stop fangirling in a minute, but sort of as we go through all your stuff.
You're boosting my self-esteem. This is going to get me through the next month, Alana.
I'm glad. And I know that it's turning nighttime there, because I can see the window changing colors as dusk sits there in France, which is crazy that you're in Paris right now and we are in Toronto. And people are saying how much they love the fact this is such an open conversation. I mean, that's what this is, right? The beauty, the silver lining of everything that's happening in our reality right now is that I can talk to Pamela Duckerman in front of a few thousand people, and this is rock and roll, and everyone can sort of see us having this awesome, really sort of organic conversation. But
can I ask you a question
about
what's happening in Canada? Like, do you
sorry, continue.
Do you think that Canadian parenting is like American parenting in a way? And are you seeing any shifts in the way people do things? Because it's you're kind of a move away from intensive parenting.
Yeah, I mean, you're asking me, and I consider myself to sort of be a mother hen to thousands of other mothers, basically because I see a shift toward people looking for answers in a variety of ways. And in some ways, they're looking in books and they're looking at traditional authors. But I think it's a mix. I think there's a mix between people sort of saying, dogmatic, like a dogma situation is where, like, let's say a sleep schedule will dictate a mother's entire life, right? Or achieving certain physiological milestones will be a measure of success. But on the flip side of it, I'm seeing this new truth coming through where people are being very candid about, like, this is hard. We're in this together, and there's not one way of doing things. And that excites me because I think as more young mothers sort of enter motherhood, they're less dumbfounded and feeling less judged, if that makes sense. And that there is multiple ways to parent. And that's why I love MomFest. And that's why we have so many experts on a variety of topics. And that's why we're kicking it off with you, Pamela, because there's so many ways to do this. And we want to create the conversation, right? We want to open the mic and we want to give people the podium to say, like, this is your chance to understand that there's many ways of doing things. And I think what I'm seeing in Canadian parenting, but maybe because I'm a champion of it, is that we can describe parenting. We don't need to prescribe parenting, right?
Right.
There's multiple ways of doing it. And maybe it's, I don't know, my women's studies degree or my master's in Jewish education or whatever, but there's so many ways.
That's a lethal combination.
Yeah, it is a very lethal combination with a degree in communications, obviously, which is why I'm here with you today. And I even haven't thought about my credentials in 10 years. And I just said them to you because it's you. I don't know. Not that there's 500 people watching.
I'm impressed.
Let's talk a little bit about love and sex and marriage and dating, because I'd love to know what's happening in the bedrooms, marriage relationships during lockdown and quarantine. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening in when people, like, Nookie. What's happening in the world of Nookie?
What's the Nookie situation?
What's the Nookie during quarantine?
Well, I was really scared when we started to lock down in France in March.
Oh
and
my
it was
God!
just
Watching,
when the
by the
news
way,
was,
my heart goes out to you, honestly, and anyone who is watching, coming from France and tuning in, watching you, because Canadians watching what was happening in France, my heart was right. Like, it was unbelievable. We were so sad for the level of quarantine and the level of state of emergency that the country was in. So
yeah, but I mean, of course, it wasn't just France; it was happening all over the world.
Of course, I mean, but I feel like France
was a special connection.
Right. It was, people were saying things like France was known for their cheese and now they're known for COVID, which is not the case because now it's a global, obviously, pandemic. But you guys were hitting really hard in March, when it was just like March 13th was when it hit, because it was my husband's birthday, really hard in Canada. And you guys were already, like, in the brunt of the front lines of
March 14th was when we locked down.
Yes.
Because that's my birthday. That's what I remember.
Oh, really? Wow.
So that wasn't when we locked down. It was when all the bars and restaurants had to close at midnight that night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There goes your birthday, Kim. Happy birthday to you, Pamela.
It was my birthday party. It was canceled. My birthday was canceled.
Oh my God, terrible.
Yeah.
No, but let's talk about love and marriage. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, we were hearing all this news out of China about how all these Chinese couples were getting divorced.
Oh yeah,
they were locked down together.
The rate of divorce in Wuhan was like crazy high.
The
right?
Wuhan divorces. So when we locked down, because they were sort of like stuck together, and the story was like women sort of realized like that they didn't. A lot of them were apparently initiated by women who realized like. Well, it turned out it was partly because their husbands were just like sitting on the couch watching TV while they were doing everything. And I think it was a last straw kind of situation. So my first thought was like, oh no, is that going to happen here? Like, it's here literally like in my apartment. But yeah. So I was sort of watching that pretty carefully. I went into it in a good place because I chose my husband because he's a good sort of like political analyst. And so a full like week before France locked down, he was already saying, it's happening in Italy, it's happening in Spain. Like, we need to stop seeing people, like we stopped socializing maybe 8 days before kind of most people we knew did. So I thought, this is great. I'm with this like genius who's going to steer me through this like unprecedented global situation. But then it turned out that this genius like cannot use a can opener, like has zero practical skills. Like, it's all brain. But so it was like, I think for a lot of people, the lockdown was about coming to terms with like, it was not about realizing like your partner is a terrible person. It was about realizing like they are limited.
Right.
and how much else you normally get from the other people in your life, whether they're like service providers or friends or people you work with. That it's asking a lot to just get it all from one person.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I actually have to say we have a VIP community called the Mom Halo, which is the sign you see to my left, maybe you're right.
Yeah.
And in the private chats happening amongst about 150-ish women, there was a lot of conversations about both sides of the coin, right? Seeing partners in new lights that people haven't seen before, and sort of the dire stress and the brunt of managing family dynamics under quarantine, and what that looked like and felt like, but also sort of the pressures on some people's relationships really hitting new highs and hitting, unfortunately, major lows. But maybe not unfortunate. Maybe it was an expedition of things that were not going well anyways for certain people, right? So it just fast forwarded sort of the inevitable. So,
Right.
and I've also seen the other side, which is like a bunch of major love affairs sort of pop up from
Oh,
the
really?
Yeah, oh yeah, I've seen a lot of like my friends who are in budding relationships, just their relationships being expeditedly moving toward very deep commitments and love. Their child
People who were just dating before
correct.
the pandemic.
Yes, that's what I mean. That's exactly what I mean. Where they're just their love relationships were also expedited towards deciding to basically live together or be quarantined, right? That sort of thing. So yeah, I find that fascinating. And you wrote an article about this, I believe. Maybe we'll link that article. It was a New York Books article about pandemic marriage, and is that what I see here? Yeah, you wrote the article about this.
Yeah. It was in the NYRB. It's on nyrb.com.
Oh, that's awesome. NYB. Oh, sorry. I read that totally wrong. My apologies.
No, you got it. It was more or less right.
Okay, we have some questions from the audience. Why don't we turn to them for a few minutes, if that's okay, Pamela, by you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Let's talk about somebody's asking about la pause, and we have a lot of young moms, so we're going to go back to la pause because maybe this is the first time they're hearing about it. Somebody's asking, how soon can you start implementing la pause? Okay. I know the answer to this, but I'll let you answer it.
Well, I'd be interested. I mean, you have more recent experience with this than I do. But in France, my impression is that it's almost from the very beginning that you can start doing it. I mean, you wouldn't want to do it for a very long time. And obviously babies have different types of cries. Like there's I just pooped in my diaper cry, which you don't want to ignore. But if it's just a cry to say like, am I okay? Is there anybody out there? You can maybe wait a little bit on that and maybe stretch out the time. That's at least what I observed from French moms.
Yeah, and what I observed from what I discerned from your book, and also through a variety of sleep coaches in my vast Rolodex, is that the concept is just give it a hot minute. Just like you put the baby down, 10 times, 15 times a day. Just observe them, see them. You don't necessarily need to run to them, and you can implement la pause very early on. I mean, it took me until my third child to really figure it out. So if you're here now and you're hearing this conversation, then I would say if there's one thing you take from this conversation and you are having some sleep deprivation or issues, or looking toward Pamela or this book or the legacy in which she has written, to discern sweet cookies from French culture, this is one to put in your back pocket, which is the idea of la pause, which is just give it a count of 10 before you tend to a fussy baby. And you're right, a diaper is different than a cry for sleep. And see, can they sort of stretch out their patience, as opposed to us being a fixer all the time of every single thing that they possibly need. Can they self-soothe for a hot minute? So that's what I discerned, and that's how I sort of implemented it in my life. Pamela, what do you think?
I think that's a really good distillation of what I saw here in France. And I think that French are really about science when it comes to parenting. And they understand that people sleep in cycles, like even adults sleep in cycles. Our cycles are longer than baby cycles. But even we, we all know this now because we sleep with our Fitbits on, like wake up many times a night in between sleep cycles, but we've just learned to go back to sleep.
Right.
Or I guess when you're in your 40s, it takes a little bit longer, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what adults do too. And so this is a skill that babies need. And the other thing that they know is that like you can be a much better parent during the day if you've had a semi-decent night. And if you're a zombie, you're not going to reach the same heights of parenting, and that's really important too. And that the whole family life, the rhythm of the family, is really important too. And another thing they talk about is how you can, even from a very young age, you can talk to your baby and explain things like, what, mommy has to get up in the morning to work, or like mommy's really exhausted right now and I just need a good night's sleep and I really need you to work with me tonight. And it sounds a little nutty, but they do that here.
I love that.
Work.
Yeah, I think there's a realization that kids can absorb things way sooner and to treat kids like adults to some degree, right? And that's
to treat them like people. I wouldn't say
people.
Like adults.
Sorry, right. That's right. To treat them like people, not like adults. Treat them like people because that's what they are.
Yeah, not like blobs. They're rational from a very.
They're rational.
Science has proven that babies can take in much more, can make moral judgments, can analyze situations.
I love that, Pamela. I'm going to ask you, and this is not necessarily one of our questions, but what are you the most excited for next year? What do you like in any realm of the world? Like what is getting your juices excited in a time when things are a little bit challenging? What are you excited for? What are you interested in? What's giving you keeping you up at night, but not in a bad way, in an excited way?
I'm excited to have a new president in America. I think that's big. That would be a very that's a crucial shift. But that's sort of globally. I'm very excited about like writing a new book and having my children's book come out, and I'm always thinking about the next project. So I think a lot about that.
I can't wait for your next project. I'm like such a huge fangirl and I can't wait to buy everything you're selling. You take all my money, Pamela. I'll just keep throwing money down your way. And I know, and I love this presentation today. I'm going to ask one last question before we open up to the audience. We have a few more minutes here, but like, if there's one piece of advice you want parents, and we have parents from a variety of ages and stages, but I would say primarily skewing quite young. I'm going to say kids under 5. What's the piece of advice you really want them to know or hear, to leave here today from you?
It gets better. It gets so much easier, and it all changes and shifts so quickly. And like now I have political arguments with my kids at dinner when it feels like just yesterday I was like trying to get them to eat sort of sweet potato puree. I don't mean that it goes so fast. Like I think everybody says it goes so fast, but that's not been my experience. Like it seemed to take a long time, but like it's so much fun to evolve into the next phase of it.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that so much. Okay, so we're going to take some questions now from the audience in our last 15 minutes here together, if that's okay, Pamela. Okay. Sorry, I also have a baby on the boob. I apologize.
No, go for it. We could maybe answer Mickey Singer's question.
Sure.
How old is your daughter now? How has she adapted to the French way?
Mm-hmm. That's Miranda. Miranda's asking that question. How old is your daughter now, and how she adapted to the French way?
Sorry.
Sure.
She's 14, so she has adapted to the French way. She goes to French school, but she also has this American side to her personality. We go back to in normal years we go back to America in the summers. She goes to American summer camp. So I think it's one of these classic cases where she feels like very Parisian in America and kind of scoffs at like what passes as cheese in New York. But she has a kind of outsider's view on France. She sees it maybe through American eyes. And also her dad is British. It's all really confusing. She has an American accent, My one of my sons has a British accent, and the third one just sounds like an adorable weirdo.
And what are the younger ones' ages?
I have twins who are 12, two
Right.
boys, and my daughter's 14.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We have a question from Jessica. What have been parts of your North American parenting style that you preferred and kept over the French style? That's a great question.
A lot of it is around schools. I think American and probably North American schools focus a lot on creativity and writing and analytical thinking, self-expression. And French schools do still have like quite a lot of memorization and I wouldn't say rote learning, but there are like lessons that you have to memorize in order to pass the test. So I really appreciate the sort of like expansiveness and freedom of some of American kids, and they sometimes seem to like follow their bliss, and whether it's like playing guitar or in a way that French kids, it feels just a little bit more circumscribed and calm. Yeah, like I think you can get through French schools without ever writing doing a creative writing story. And I'm grateful that my kids have a bit of that as well.
That's awesome. I think that's a really interesting perspective. Maybe that piece of French curriculum and education actually plays out pretty dramatically in the French personality. Like French are considered to be quite, I don't want to say this. I don't know how to say this. Like they're
linear.
Linear. That is the word, Pam. You took it from my mouth. They're linear. And I guess it comes from that existence, right?
Yeah. Things are pretty rigid here. Like you have to have a degree and in order to pursue any profession. Whereas in America, you could sort of reinvent yourself. And here it's very hard to change careers and it's very hard to get, especially after a certain age. America feels like, and people are kind of afraid of taking chances. You know, they famously have these like contracts for life in different jobs. So people don't want to take the risk of changing jobs as much. So there isn't as much entrepreneurship, as much of a feeling of like that you can create something completely new and other people will support you. That happens here. There are entrepreneurs here, of course, but it's not the same kind of moonshot feeling that you get in places like Silicon Valley or New York or
right, of course.
Toronto. Yeah.
And do you still feel very much like do you still feel like you're studying the French people when you're there? Do you feel like any moment that you observe something as a voyeur or as a sociologist, you're sort of watching a culture and discerning? Do you still feel that? Do you still get those moments?
Yes. I have, I think it's still really exciting to me to live in a foreign country and to learn about new aspects of it and compare it to North America. I think it's exhausting for the people that I'm around.
Like, stop looking at me, Pamela.
Like even close friends, like they're like, you cannot quote me in this article. That was not for attribution. I love that. You know, they say like when a writer is born, a family is destroyed.
I've never heard that expression, but I like that.
I think there's a version of that for a more mild version of that for journalists.
I love that. So somebody just wrote, Miranda just said, they just want to second that, you know, things get better, that they're younger. You feel like you're in horrible stages that will never end. And then they passed and it's like, what was that? And now I miss, and then they miss it now that their kids are a little bit older and that there's new challenges. What I've heard is it goes from being quite literally a handful to being a heartful. That's what I've heard before. And that's sort of the credo that I repeat. I'm like, I know this is fleeting and it's hard in the minute, but I know it's over tomorrow. So, you know, the sleeplessness and the breastfeeding and the potty training and all these things that I'm sort of living and breathing right now with all my 3 kids under 4 is, it's really, it's challenging, but, I know we'll get through it and there'll be new challenges as obviously they get older.
They start asking for money.
For money. When does that happen? Is
around age 10.
Is chores a thing in France?
Yes.
How does
It's
that work? Like, what is the relationship with kids and money? Is it a young age do they start understanding, or is it
oh, you mean to pay them for chores?
right? That's what I mean. The idea of like working for dollars.
As a matter of principle, like don't pay my kids for emptying the dishwasher. I just
Fair.
tell them that they're part of the household and they have to do it. But I do also give them pocket money. It's an urban thing. Like my kids walk to and from school, and there are like many shops along the way where they can buy croissants and everything else. So yeah, they buy their after school snacks.
And what's like the age of employment? When would a kid get their first job in France?
They're required to do an internship when they're 14.
Oh wow.
So it's like a job training just for a week. That's through school. It's all over France. And then they do another one a couple of years later, but I don't think they really work until they're college age.
Oh wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. That's
It's
interesting.
possible that 14, 15, 16-year-olds babysitting. I think they do babysitting,
That sort of thing. Yeah.
kind of informal.
I love that. Okay, cool. Well, we have a few more minutes here. If anyone else wants to, Mikey is on our Mikey Singer, who is our events manager, is just bringing over some questions. We can now really open it up. If anyone has anything they'd like to ask Pamela, we can close it out with a few more questions. I'm happy to address them here. And in the meantime, Pamela, where the book Paris by Phone, where will that be available for purchase if somebody wants to buy that book? Is it pre-order now?
Yes, it's available for pre-order anywhere that you buy books. It's a story that was inspired by a conversation I had with my daughter.
Okay.
I had an argument with her one day, and she said, I'm really mad at you. I'm going to pick up this phone, and I'm going to find a new mother. Like, I'm literally just going to like dial a random number, and whoever answers the phone is going to be my new mom. And I thought it was like funny, but also kind of like proof that kids are trapped in their families, and they're really stuck. I mean, even though they go to school, your home is your whole world, and the phone is so important. It seems like the only way out. So this book is kind of it's based on that story.
Oh my God, I can't wait till my kids say something like that. Profound to me. I like can't wait for that moment. I can't wait for any of these. Like, I'm so excited for those parenting challenges or moments where I'm like, what the did you just say? Like, I can't wait for those moments. I think that's riveting, honestly.
Actually, the full thing that my daughter said was, I'm going to pick up this phone and find myself a new mother, and she's going to smoke. What? like that, not only would she be in a new household, but she'd be getting all this secondhand smoke, which she knows I would hate.
Oh my God. I love that. That's so funny. I wonder, have you given any thought to, I mean, maybe you can, I mean, I'm totally asking you a completely random question, but a conversation did come up in our VIP community. One of our mom's kids just had her first period. Is that something that's treated differently in French culture at all, about how women menstruate or how kids come into?
All I know is that there are all these new ways to cope with menstruation now.
Right. Well, that's definitely across the board.
Yeah. So I think that has something to do with it. I also think that, and this is partly to do with like the internet and partly just like the sort of like feminist evolution,
yes,
is that like it's much more discussed now, like that menstruation and what it means and when someone is menstruating, and it's not, I feel like in my day it was all sort of like on the down low and hidden, and it was supposed to be invisible, and now it's like very much discussed in a way that I think is extremely healthy.
Yeah, I think I agree with you entirely. I think there's been some pretty awesome revolutions in sort of how, I guess I won't even say like technology or coping mechanisms have been put into place to deal with menstrual blood and the conversation around it. I just wasn't sure if Paris in particular has a different mechanism in which they deal with the conversation, because your observations are always so obviously profound. So I was wondering perhaps with a 14-year-old daughter, if that's something that has come up at all.
It's a really good idea for an article. If I can find a way to write it without humiliating my daughter, I'll go forward on that.
Well, then we won't tell her. Okay, we'll use a different name.
She still can't read, so I guess it's fine.
She still can't read. I love that. Okay, well, without further ado, Pamela, I just want to thank you so much for everything you said today. I find that you're obviously your book, your writings, your thoughts on all this. And sorry, this is my son. Here's Henry. This is Henry. He's 12 weeks old, and he's the one who's hiccuping here with his gunky eyes. I really have to thank you, and I mean, on behalf of sort of the Canadian audience watching here today, please keep writing, please keep watching, keep being a voyeur and penning those ideas, because it's these aha moments that you sort of are able to distill are revolutionary. And I have to say, like, you know, your daughter's 14, but the lessons are and it's classic. Like, it doesn't go out of style, what you're teaching here. So, and what you're reporting on. So, thank you so much for your time today. If somebody wants to follow you and the things you're writing and saying, maybe Mike, you can throw up your Twitter handle. Is that where you're the most active, I believe?
Sure, at Pamela Druck on Twitter.
Okay.
And I have a Facebook authors page, and I have also an Instagram page, which I think is at Pamela Druck as well.
That's amazing.
But Alana, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everything you do, bringing moms together to talk about things in a really clear way. I think it's a huge service.
Well, thank you so much. And everybody, if let's give a big virtual round of applause to our kickoff keynote guest, Pamela Duckerman. Thank you so much for being here with us today. This conversation was super riveting, and I think you've really hit home with some people. If they don't know who you are, they know who you are now. And for those of you who are been fans of yours for a long time, I think it's so awesome to hear about the things you've been working on. And we hope that your family continues to be safe in Paris. We wish you so much health and happiness, and we cannot wait for Paris by Phone to be released in February 2021. We'll pre-order that, and maybe I will actually even give away a copy and pre-order it for some lucky member who has participated with us today. So that's wonderful. Guys, stick around. Thank you so much, Pamela. If you are with us for the rest of the day, we're about to enter our lunch hour. Please go use the bathroom. Please stretch your legs. Go take that coffee break, cigarette break. Do whatever you need to do. I'm inspired by the French. Go take some vapes. Go hit a bong. I don't care. Do whatever you need to do right now to get you through the day. We're about to go into our opening of our market. Pamela, you're welcome to join and do some online shopping if you want. We have wonderful vendors, and we also have our sort of learning sessions now. So there's sessions happening from 12 to 12:30 and 12:30 to 1. So make your way to those sessions. And thanks again, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of MomFest. And Pamela, au revoir, my friend. And we will see you again soon.
You. Hope to see you in person one day.
All the best. Take care. Thank you, everybody.